How many of us actually think about mental health? Not just our own, but the people around us, and even the people we view in the media as well as social media. We've probably all experienced a situation with a friend or a loved one that has made us question them, their actions, and their behavior. In some cases, we may think about how it affects us, but not necessarily how it affects them. Mental health is something that is hardly talked about in our community. There are so many stigmas attached and fear of how they may be received. So many sufferers simply suffer alone in silence, out of fear of rejection and shame. The words we use in connection with mental health and those that suffer from mental health issues are part of the reasons why there are so many hang-ups and taboos with mental illness. Crazy, nut job, psycho, warped, and even possessed. These words freely leave our mouths when describing sufferers of mental illness, without thought of how it can affect the victims and sufferers. There's such a strong taboo in the Black community and fear of embarrassment, shame, and almost persecution that many victims of mental illness refuse to open up or even get the necessary help they need. In turn, this allows negative thoughts and feelings to grow. Different communities in the African diaspora, like in the Caribbean and parts of Africa itself, make assumptions that when someone is suffering with a mental health imbalance, that they could be spiritually possessed. Instead of providing the sufferer with the help they need, they utilize the help of pastors, priests, and exorcists, all through a lack of understanding, education, and empathy. You can imagine the fear and paranoia this creates in the sufferer's mind, which can exasperate their condition further. They think they're helping, but little do they realize they're making things worse and adding to the problems. Many times the victims of these mental illnesses are made to feel invisible, with no one to talk to or confide in. They fear being ridiculed, ignored, or worse. Our attitudes towards them can make them feel uncomfortable or unconfident to talk about what they're feeling and going through. These attitudes force them to keep everything bottled up inside and prevents them from seeking the help they need. Our day-to-day stresses, experiences, trials, and tribulations can become extremely taxing on our mental well-being. Breakups in relationships, lack of strong connections, and breakdowns in friendships can all play a role and add to deep-rooted issues. A lot of us don't realize that there is a lot we can do to help sufferers in our families and groups of friends. But sadly, due to some of our attitudes, the telltale signs go unnoticed, ignored, and we miss the cues to help prevent some of these problems. Many people in our community are hesitant and even reluctant to discuss or even acknowledge the possibility of mental health imbalance being an issue within our loved ones and our family members. When we think of mental illnesses, we think of things like schizophrenia or dementia and so on. We never really think of how stress and depression can greatly affect our mental health. Clinical depression can genuinely be a death sentence. Some of us dismiss mental illnesses as not being real. We dismiss the sufferers of depression as simply being a little sad, or sufferers of bipolar disorder as being emotional, or just making excuses to act a certain way, without ever truly understanding or being empathetic to how they're actually suffering and what they're truly going through. As a man whose mother suffered with severe anxiety and depression for many years, which led her to taking her own life in the year 2000, I often wonder if there wasn't a taboo within our community, would my mother have sought the help she so desperately needed? Could she still be around now? If there was a different attitude towards mental health, would my mother be alive? My mother refused to seek any form of therapy or to even speak to anyone. She would make it very clear to let me know that she was not crazy and refused to be treated as such. After my mother's death, I was 14 years old. I found that my mother's own reluctance to get help or even acknowledge her issues had been passed down to me in a way. When people would ask me how my mother died, I couldn't tell them that she committed suicide. I felt a sense of shame and sadness. I didn't want them to judge my mother. I didn't want them to think, oh, his mom was crazy. So I would lie and say she passed away of natural causes or a physical illness. Mental illness is oftentimes hidden or not spoken about until something happens that makes it no longer possible to hide. As a community, we're simply not open to speaking about mental illness or even getting the help we may need. I think we're also not aware of the real numbers of people in our community that are suffering. How many of us pay attention or even honestly care unless it's happening directly within our family? Over 6.8 million Black and mixed Americans were diagnosed with a mental illness or mental health imbalances in 2014. Studies in the United Kingdom in 2015 found that Black British people were the least likely to seek treatment of any ethnic or racial group, a figure of only 6.2% of those diagnosed or suspected with mental illness actually receiving treatment or therapy. And those are just the numbers of people that stepped up and were able to be recorded. So you can imagine the numbers for people suffering in silence, hidden away. We sometimes watch people, even on YouTube, that we can clearly see are suffering with some forms of mental illness. We watch as their conditions get worse and deteriorate, but we sit back, we watch and laugh. We sometimes comment that they need therapy or help, sometimes out of true concern, but more often out of jest. But how many of us realize that we could also be playing a role in their health issue? Could we do something about it? Could we help them? Or are we simply stuck in enabling them further for our own entertainment? Mental health issues, especially for people of the African diaspora, have played a factor in our lives. Whether we realize or even care to admit or acknowledge it, post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic slave syndrome has become a real factor in our lives genetically. Our ancestors were brainwashed, manipulated, broken down, mentally abused, and emotionally as well as physically tortured. And now the descendants of those victims are still subjected to a similar treatment today, yet under a different disguise. Black people are still carrying these traumas. Our history has been proven to have an influence in our lives today. Studies state that we can inherit pain and trauma experienced by previous generations. These days, mental health is only talked about when it seems to affect the majorities, but not so much how it affects people of the African diaspora. The effects on the Black psyche are very different and need to be treated in a completely different manner. Mental illness is a silent killer, with very few people willing to speak out. By speaking more directly about mental health issues, we can change some of the cultural taboos, perceptions, and prejudices that are associated with mental illness. If we become more open and understanding, as well as more willing to learn and educate ourselves, the topic of mental illness in our community will become less of a shameful and hidden topic. It might help more people to speak up and seek the help they need. For many people suffering with mental illness, they just need someone to talk to, listen, and to not be judgmental. Sometimes simply talking in a compassionate manner can do so much. We never know what someone else is going through until we talk to them and truly listen. An open, unbiased, non-judgmental dialogue can make a real difference to someone's life. You don't have to suffer alone or in silence. Sufferers of mental health, illness, and imbalance should be treated with the same consideration, concern, and compassion as other health issues. It shouldn't be swept under the rug. It shouldn't be hidden. It shouldn't be seen as taboo. It requires communication, understanding, and for the sufferers to feel like they will be given the necessary help they need and require without judgment. I put a video in the description that I'd also like you to watch about the reasons behind skin bleaching. This too is a form of mental illness. So please check that out. Peace, love, and coconut oil.
Hey man, that's racist. Please remember that from now on, brand new never before seen videos, as well as live streams, will only be available on my website, ikyg.com, via a Patreon subscription. ikyg.com is a Black-owned, Black-ran platform, 100% free from censorship. It's the only place where we don't have to worry about what we say and expressing ourselves. Make sure you check out the description and the comment section for important links, as well as information in video form that shows you what benefits you get when you support the site and join my Patreon. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, then don't forget to subscribe and be notified every time I upload a video. For exclusive content and perks, check out my Patreon. This is where we have private live streams, group chats, live Q&As, live phone calls, and open topics. This is a safe space where you can interact with other like-minded people, make friends, send each other direct private messages, and so much more without any trolls. And yes, you get to use GIFs and images in the live chats. So what are you waiting for? This is a completely independent website, free from censorship. If you'd like to make a donation towards the site so we can continue to put out the truth without fear of being silenced, then please hit that donation button. It's greatly appreciated. Check out the rest of the site for videos, private and public live streams, find out all the tea, and make sure to utilize the Black Money section of the website. Advertise your business absolutely free to people that look like you, free forever. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at angel_IKYG.